Welcome to Dune, chapter by chapter. I'm Dominic. So, in the last chapter, it was about Jessica waiting to see if Paul had passed the worm riding test. And in that one, we got a lot of insight into Alia and how the other memory works, and Hera and what she thinks of Alia, and how she kind of gave Jessica a warning about how the other Fremen might perceive Alia because she's so strange because she has all this vast knowledge. She's not a 2-year-old, even though she is a 2-year-old. She's like this ancient being trapped in a 2-year-old's body. And so that's what the last chapter was about. So now in this chapter, Paul goes to ride the worm and he succeeds. And we get a really good description of how that's done in this chapter. So as the worm is coming up out of the sand, he calls a gigantic worm, huge one. And it comes towards the thumper, and then he uses the maker hooks to crack open the gill, the scale there. And then that was something that I remember before I read the book. When I used to watch David Lynch movie, like it shows Paul doing that in the David Lynch film, and I never could understand what he was doing. And it didn't totally make sense until I read the book, and then it made sense. Oh, okay, he's doing that because the sand irritates the skin underneath the scale, and then that's why the sandworm rolls upwards to keep that vulnerable part as far away as possible from the sand, so it doesn't get irritated, and it won't go below the sand as long as that is cracked open. So we get a very good description of it here in this chapter as Paul does it. And so he succeeds. He gets on top of the sandworm. He climbs the sandworm. And then Stilgar and the other Fremen, they all follow him. Chani as well. They all get on the back of this huge worm. And they start to ride the worm out into the desert, the southern region. Now, the only thing Paul passed at the same time, he didn't use a backup. So the Fremen part of the test is you're always supposed to use someone as a backup in case you're not able to get on the worm, and this is permissible in part of the test because that's the correct way to do things. So Paul passes, but at the same time Stilgar has to scold him a bit here, and Paul's kind of stung by that. His pride kind of took a hit, but and he kind of gets angry, but he's kind of mad at Stilgar, but also mad at himself for making that mistake. But then the training he receives from his mother kicks in, and he's able to get control of his emotions. And Stilgar reminds him, you don't have to do everything on your own. The Fremen, we work as a team. We're all together in this. That's how the tribe survives. And so now they're on their way into the deep desert, and Paul is kind of more taking command here. And now we see the tensions between Stilgar and Paul start to rise up, because now that he's passed this test, there's been all this talk among the other Fremen that if Paul passes this test riding the sandworm, now he has to call out Stilgar, because this is the last thing he had to do, because there's no one really in the tribe that can defeat Paul in combat. And so they think the way Fremen culture is designed, so the strongest always prevails. So whoever the leader of a tribe, that guy is the strongest guy in the tribe, because that's how they got to that position. Either they got there by defeating the old leader, now they're the leader, and if there is no leader, whoever the strongest one is, if they can beat them, it's always going to be the strongest one. And so Paul realizes this, and Stilgar realizes this, but Paul doesn't want to fight Stilgar, because this isn't really going to do them any good in the long run. And everything is going to change big time because of Paul being a part of the Fremen, and him and his mother training all the Fremen warriors in the weirding ways to make this unstoppable army that's just going to mow right through the Sardaukar. And so Paul's aim here is really and the other thing is he wants to avoid this dark future that he keeps seeing of this jihad that's going to wage through the universe, and billions are going to be killed and it's going to be because of Paul. And he doesn't want that to happen, but he feels he's getting pulled down that path. And so he thinks that it would be better if Stilgar lives, because Stilgar is just too useful to Paul, and they've become friends. And this is something where they're going to have to modify Fremen customs. But Stilgar can't see no other way out of this, because his mind is too locked into Fremen ways. So to him, this is just inevitable. And he knows if he fights Paul, he's done. But he's going to fight him anyway, because that's just the way it is with the Fremen. But where Paul is an outsider, he's from Caladan and he's Atreides and all that, he can think outside the box. So he doesn't want to fight them. So he doesn't know how to get out of it. And so in this chapter, you can really feel the tension kind of rising between the two of them. And so as they're riding this gigantic sandworm out into the desert, they spot an ornithopter off into the distance. Paul spots one. And at that point, they don't know what the markings are yet, or if they've seen them. And now at this point in the story, nobody knows that the Fremen are actually able to ride the sandworms. Nobody knows it. The Harkonnens don't know it. The Atreides didn't know it. Nobody knew it. So they don't really want that to be revealed. And so now they have to, because usually when the Fremen ride the worms, they usually ride the worm until it's completely exhausted. That way, when they jump off the worm, it'll immediately go into the sand and escape. Where if they don't and they jump off, they kind of run the risk of the worm probably turning and attacking. So they have to risk it now, because there's this ornithopter that's coming in view, and they don't want, they try to keep everything they do as secret as possible. And on top of that, nobody knows Paul is alive. At this point, the other characters in the story, like House Harkonnen and the survivors of the Atreides, they think Paul is dead. Paul and his mother are dead. They don't know that Muad'Dib is Paul. There's stories of this new Fremen leader and this religious character, Muad'Dib, and all this, almost like a new religion forming up around Paul among the Fremen. And as we've seen in the one chapter, the Baron just laughs that off. That's nothing to even think about, and like they don't take it seriously. And even though Rabban has been trying to hide it from his uncle, the losses he's taking because of this new Fremen leader. So that's the other reason they don't want to get spotted. So they decide to get off of the worm. They use their cloaks to hide. And then Paul spots that it's not a Harkonnen ornithopter. It doesn't have Harkonnen markings or anything like that. It's smugglers. That's who's operating this ornithopter. So they must have a hideout there somewhere. But, Paul says, well, it's smugglers. And then, but what are they doing? They're taking a lot of risks, because usually smugglers don't go this deep into the desert. And so they must be chasing after spice. So Paul decides right then and there, we got to set a trap and get rid of the smugglers, because we can't risk the smugglers seeing anything going off. And because they're smugglers, they can be bought. So they might sell that information to the Harkonnens. So in this chapter, Paul decides, okay, well, we're going to set a trap for the smugglers. And since they're looking for spice. And so Stilgar goes along with the plan, and then he's thinking, Paul is starting to think more and more like a Fremen. And then, we got to get rid of the smugglers. We got to, set a trap, kill them all, so they can't let anyone know what's going on out in the desert, or what we're doing out here, or anything like that. And on top of this really illustrates, like, the Fremen are really brutal. Like, there's not really any good guys in Dune. These are just smugglers out doing their own thing, and now they're going to get butchered by Fremen just because they took a chance and wandered too deep into Fremen territory. And that's also why there's no satellites around Arrakis or anything like that, or why none are allowed, is because the Fremen have access to a lot of spice, so they can buy off the Spacing Guild, but they know others can be bought, so they don't trust the smugglers. And they want to keep all their activities as secret as possible. And but it's going to be an interesting thing is going to happen when they meet these smugglers. So that'll be cool to get into that. So it's this is another one of those chapters. This is almost like a key moment in the book, is Paul riding this worm. This is in every well, there's only been 2 film adaptations of Dune, the 1984 film and then the 2000 miniseries. But in each of them, this is in there where Paul has to take this test and ride the worm. So hopefully when we get Dune Part 2 from Denis Villeneuve, this is one of those things that will be in there, is Paul doing this test. It might even be in, I don't think it'll be in the first movie, because this is pretty far into the book. But for sure it'll be in Part 2, Paul having to take this test and ride the back of a giant sandworm. So it's just certain things in the book that are like almost like key points, key chapters, that if you're going to make a Dune film, you have to include these key chapters in it. And this is one of the key events, is this test that Paul undergoes to become a real Fremen, or enter into manhood kind of thing, and prove himself among the tribe. So pretty cool stuff. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one.